What's up guys, Zach with Wired Customs, and today we're going to be tearing apart a 47 Ford transmission. Now I rebuild these early Ford transmissions all the time. Up on deck I have a 39, a 36, I have a 47. I think I have another 39 that I got to do after this. So I'm running through these all the time, and there's not very much information online. There's some really good like Vern Tardell books, but even he glazes over certain year transmissions and certain differences. And I figured I'm going to start a series on rebuilding these transmissions. These transmissions are probably going to take 2 videos. One to take it apart, one to reassemble it. Instead of having one video that's a half an hour long, it'd be easier for you to slide through it back and forth as you're rebuilding yours, kind of go along. Throughout this series, as I'm rebuilding them, I will show you the differences. I'll show you something for this year, something for that year. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss your year transmission. Okay, so I've already drained the case for a couple days while I was doing other work to the car. I definitely suggest you to drain the case for like an hour at least to get all that heavy oil out of there. If it's the right oil, it'll be very thick. It'll take a very long time for it all to drain out. So now we're going to take the actual shifter off. If this was a floor shift, we'd call it the tower. This is a side shift, so this is the side shift cover right here. The back one is first reverse. The front one is second and third. So we just want to make sure both are right in the middle. And we're going to take these bolts out. It'll come out very easily here. So let's zip these off. We should be able to break this loose. Might have to tap it with a hammer very carefully. We're not hitting it. There we go. If you have to tap it very lightly. Here goes our shifter. Let's pull this other fork out here. Unique looking forks compared to other early Fords. So make sure you put these in here the way that they came out. And try to keep them together so when you take it apart to clean it, you don't get anything backwards, misaligned in the transmission after the fact. So let's slide this down here. In order to get this transmission out of the car, because I still had the engine in the car, I had to pull the rear end out first. You have to take the transmission crossmember off, and you have to take out the rear yoke. This yoke just has a bolt that goes right through the back, so you just tip the yoke up so it lines up, hit that bolt out. Pretty simple. So we're going to come over here to the throwout bearing and take the throwout bearing off. And this is a simple, don't worry, impact, electric, no big deal if that has broke. But so the first, this is really easy to get the throwout bearing off. We're going to grab this spring and pull the spring over the throwout bearing. Throwout bearing is going to slide off. That was pretty gummed up and nasty. But what you want to do is save this housing. These housings are reusable. You press the bearing off, press the new bearing on. So it's a nice cast housing. Just make sure it's not cracked, broke right here or anything, so everything looks good. We'll replace that bearing here shortly. Now if you want to get this fork off, you're going to have to get this pin out from that direction. So you're going to have to push this pin out. You can make a little press that's going to push it inside the case. You're going to have to heat it up a little bit on the fork. Pull the spring off here, save that. Your rebuild kit should come with a new one, but I like to have some on hand. Now we're going to take this off right here, and we're actually going to start seeing the transmission come apart. This holds the input shaft in. It retains the bearing on the inside. So we're going to take these 4 bolts out here. Most of the time this is stuck on really good, so, well, I stand corrected. So here's our front seal right here, so we're going to be pulling that out later and replacing that seal after we clean it up. Here is our input shaft bearing, and this retainer is not going to hold it into the transmission, so we don't need to worry about taking this retainer off to get it apart, but we're going to need this retainer to put on the new bearing. So you can take it off now, take it off later. And here's our other retainer that holds the bearing on. So we can take that out now or take it out later, that's up to you. Technically it's going to come out this direction to come out. But right now this input shaft is hitting on the counter shaft below. So if we want to get this out, we need to push out our counter shaft rod so the counter shaft can fall down. That's going to get our input shaft out. So now we need to get our tail housing off. It's going to be these 9/16 right here. When we get that tail housing off, our shafts that holds the counter shaft and the reverse gear is going to pull out this way. So this is kind of in the way for that. There we go. Now make sure you remember the flat side's the bottom. The side with the casting is the top. It will never go back in the car if you put that on upside down. So here's our two shafts that I was telling you about. They're retained in by a pin that goes all the way across. And we just need to pull this cotter pin out. That pin will come out. Then our shafts will come off. There we go. There's that. Now both of these shafts have to come out the back. So let's go ahead and drop the counter shaft. To drop the counter shaft inside the case, we're going to have to push this pin out right here. It's actually kind of hard to get to. Now in order to get this shaft fork out, you should be able to tap it lightly with a hammer on this side. But I got lucky that mine's so loose. So slightly tap that out with a hammer, then pull it the rest of the way out straight up on this side. Easy now. There we go. Now this shift fork is going to slide as the shaft itself comes out. And just remember how that comes out. See how it's casted in the front with a pin in the front. If you were to reverse it, you couldn't reach the pin. Okay, so this shaft is going through the counter shaft and it is really, really hard bear to get out. I can feel grooves in it right here already. So now that I have this shaft out, maybe like halfway, I'm going to fill that up with oil, let it soak some, because it shouldn't be this hard. Okay, so now I got that shaft out. It was way harder than it should have been. I've never had one that was that hard to take out, but it has really bad grooves right here. Especially up here, very bad groove. So I'm anxious to see what the bearings look like inside of it, but it's going to need a new shaft. That's not going to be okay. Now that the counter shaft drops down with that out, the input shaft should come out the front. So that came out the front of the case, and inside the input shaft we should have straight cut roller bearings. So we shouldn't have to reuse those, but it's good to know what shape everything's in. We won't know too much until we clean everything up, but first glance, our synchronizer teeth here look good. Our teeth on the gear here looks really good. That's a constant mesh, so it doesn't engage or anything like that, so it should be good unless something's drastically wrong. And our synchronizer surface, it's hard to tell that it's dirty, but that looks good. So these are the things you need to be looking at as you tear this apart. Okay, now the fun part, we're going to have to take the reverse gear off. So right here is the reverse gear. That pin should go out the back the same way that this shaft went out the back. Hopefully this will go a little bit easier. And I'm just going to give it love taps, nothing crazy. Wow, this one looks like it's going to be just as bad. I don't know why these shafts are so hard. So I had to tap that shaft into the case because this one was also really hard. So there's been some kind of weird rebuild on this at some point in time. and it's actually causing some drag. So you can see actually it's buffed there, then cut here. So we might be replacing the brass bearings inside what contacts this shaft. We'll have to look at that too. Oh my gosh. You can hear this output shaft bearing. That is very nasty. Good thing we're building this. So you guys are getting a treat on this one, or a learning experience on this one, because they're usually not this hard to take apart. So I'm going to have to use my bearing puller to get the bearing off the output shaft. It shouldn't have been this hard to come off, but it is, so this is what it's going to take. There is a thrush washer behind this, so as soon as I start pulling this off, that little thrush washer or slinger washer, whatever you want to call it, needs to be replaced. So as long as you realize that before you do this, this is not going to hurt anything that we're not aware of. The threads on this are recessed down here. So I'm not hurting anything on this either. It's almost like they expected it to come off this way. So let's start pulling this off. This is just a little Harbor Freight puller, something anyone could get. And instead of using an impact, I'm going to do it by hand. I just like to be careful with my stuff. Oh yeah, this is coming off nice. I'm not barely putting any pressure on this. It's pulling it off for me. Oh, my reverse gear is falling out. My sinker fell out, and my detents for my sinker fell out just from me playing around with this. But that's okay, I realized that, and I'll show you how to fix that in case you do the same thing. We're not hurting anything here at this process. Still, minimal pressure. This is very easy. If yours is harder than this, get the torch out. About to come out now. Very easy, like butter now, like butter. So here's our output shaft bearing that's getting replaced. Here's that little oil slinger washer, whatever you want to call it, on the back side. It is actually rusty and nasty, so we're going to replace that either way around. It does look like I compressed it some. I pushed it in. So be careful of that, mindful of that when you're taking yours apart. Now that everything's falling apart on the inside, we can actually get this out. So here's our reverse gear. It has a brass bushing on the inside. This shoulder goes to the back. So this side doesn't have the same shoulder. So in order for this to be set right in the gear lash, shoulder goes to the rear. Now our output shaft should come out. Slide it like up in the air here. Our first gear here is about to fall off. So here's our first here. This is the first gear. Go ahead and slide this off the back. This is where the shifter fork goes into. So remember, the shifter fork goes in the back. Okay? So if you don't remember that, just rewatch the video. And I'm just going to throw mine on the bench. But what I recommend for you to do is, as you take this off, put it on a clothes hook, a rod, so you know the process of how they sat and went on to the output shaft, so you don't put anything on backwards later on. Okay, everything else is going to come off the front. I want to take an inventory check real quick. So I'm missing this spring detent and little end there. That one's in there, so I haven't lost that one yet. That one's in there, so I haven't lost that one yet. Before I do anything, I'm going to find pieces that I just lost. So let's look down in here, and I'm going to go ahead and take the counter shaft off. Now what you want to be mindful when you take this counter shaft out is, where was your thrust washers? Okay, so boom, here's my thrust washers. This one came off and was touching the case. This one is actually kind of snapped, but not really snapped into the back side there. So here's the grooves. You can see where it was sitting. This notched out section goes towards the gears. So keep mindful of how things come apart so you don't lose them, or so you don't get them backwards when you go back together. So we're going to set this off to the side here. Just throw it in my pile, but for you, don't throw it in your pile. We should have roller bearings on both sides. Here's our washer on the front, so we're going to be mindful of that. This washer has a tab that locks into the case. This tab does not lock into anything here. It's a smooth surface on that side. Now this fell off as I was coming out, so we should have straight rollers on the front. We should have straight rollers in the back. And these are more oily than I thought they were going to be. I thought all this was going to be burnt up. Then we have our little separator in the middle. And that just sets the bearings in there in the proper width, I guess you could say. And there is the counter shaft. Big gear on the front, small gear on the back. A little bit of lash wear here, but nothing I'm worried about. Then our first gear is unsynchronized, so we can see first gear here is actually ate up pretty bad. So that does look nasty. So if you're doing this for somebody, or if you're doing this for yourself, you need to realize you double clutch first always. You double clutch down. Always double clutch into first, no matter what direction you're going in, neutral or downshifting. So you can see the teeth here. I have missing teeth on my counter shaft. This is not good. This is going to have to get replaced. And let's take a second look at first gear. I didn't see it pulling out. Look at me, I said I was going to find parts in here, and I'm already going off on a different rant. Yeah, I'm missing some teeth on first. First is 8 up there. 8 up there. So I would want to replace the counter shaft and first gear. Luckily for me, I have those parts here on hand, but if you don't, check out the early Ford store. They have a great surplus of these early transmission parts. I'll put the link at the bottom of the screen here so you can order your parts and check out prices. Also look at Max Auto Parts, the link at the bottom here. Those are the two places that I get my parts from, and I price match them back and forth. Now let's get my parts that lost in here. Good. So the little ball here on this detent on the earlier transmissions, let's clean this off real quick. On the earlier transmissions, this is a ball here. I'm going to wipe that off. I don't think you could see that. This is a ball, a steel ball that can fall out. On these later transmissions, this is just a single tab with the detent machined or pressed into the tab. So we're almost apart, not completely just yet. But the case itself is finished, other than cleaning it and taking out these and resealing all that up. But I'm happy with these brass bushings. I'm just going to clean them up, grease them when they go back together. Okay, so here's where we want to be careful and not shoot springs out all over the place. So grab your little detents here, pull this off, and try to remember that the shoulder for this synchronizer goes forward, okay? Set it down somewhere so you're organized. There's our little synchronizer tab that we were just messing with on the other one. And on this side, here's our last synchronizer tab. To get to this synchronizer here, this brass synchronizer that we're going to replace, we need to take this pin off here. So this is a little slide-on pin. It should be easy to come off, but you've seen how this transmission has been so far. So this should slide off the front. There it is. Don't lose that. That's important. Now we have this C-clip, O-ring, whatever you like to call those. We're going to spread that out and get our little synchronizer housing off here. So yes, these aren't all the exact proper names for everything, but if you know how to take it apart and put it together, who cares what they're called? And I promise you I made that look easier than what it really is. So if you're struggling, it's normal. You need to spin it off with your screwdriver like this. The screwdriver's stuck. Put that to the side. This should come off. Now this does have a shoulder as well. There's a deeper shoulder on the front, shallower shoulder on the rear. Slide that off. Make sure everything looks fine, but these are usually always good. Then here is our synchronizer. Synchronizer's off. Then this gear, we take this off to make sure the brass bushing is on the inside is good. So after we get it cleaned up, we want to make sure there's not really any play on this. We want to make sure there's no grooves, and make sure our oiler, which what these cutouts are is the oiler, make sure the oiler is in good shape. So I would say what this transmission needs is first gear, because our teeth are ate up. It's going to need the counter shaft, because the teeth are ate up on the counter shaft. And the counter shaft, I guess you could call it. Like I said, these aren't the most specific names in the world, but if you know how to order stuff, it doesn't matter what it's called, right? So this needs to get ordered, counter shaft, and our first gear. So other than that, this transmission is completely usable. It looks great. When it comes to the shifter housing, these are always simple on Fords. If you want to get these off, hit these pins off. We can get to these shafts. And our shafts can kind of come out from this direction. Now these are really simple. If you look at how this is operating, there's a spring and detent in there. Spring and detent on this side. So if this isn't shifting smoothly like this and holding in place, this could be worn out. You know, these little cutouts could be worn out and you can replace those. Or the springs could have been broken. There's a spring right here in the middle. Or our little detents could have an issue that could be broken or frozen. Most of the time it's not that any of the stuff is bad, it's because it's rusted and dried on the inside and just stuck in. It can compress the spring, get stuck, and rust stuck. So that's usually one of the more common problems with this type of shifter housing. And as you can see, these are easily replaced. So if you run into those being broken, which doesn't happen very often on the side shifts, it happens more often on the top shifts, just because you can put more pressure straight from the gear. All the pressure from this is coming from the column. So this is in good shape. I'm not going to take this apart. I am going to soak it and clean it really, really well. Make sure everything is oiled really well and very clean before I put it back together. This will shift just fine. Okay, so overall, this transmission is still in good shape. Let's face it. A couple bad gears. If this was a T5 and you had one bad gear, you'd probably be pretty happy. This is not that big of a deal. We're going to get these parts ordered. We're going to get it replaced. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to put it back together. So if you want to see that video, just like this one, subscribe to the channel. Now get off of YouTube and get your shift together.